The Revolutionary Wars of France, 1795. 1795 was a year of exhaustion, reconciliation, and preparation. The French operations to conquer and occupy Holland continued, and the Dutch people were supportive of the French occupation. This continued into the spring until the Treaty of The Hague in May. Holland was reorganized into the Batavian Republic and became an independent quasi-colony of France. Prussia, seeing how the wind was blowing even before Holland was occupied, signed the Treaty of Basel and left the coalition against France. French forces continued to move forward in the Catalonian region of Spain until Spain also requested a peace treaty in July and then chose to join France as an ally. While there remained internal revolts to be dealt with, the only external threats to France were the Italian frontier and the southern Rhine frontier. The enemies on these fronts were the Austrians and the Piedmontese in the south, and the Austrian forces with their smaller German state allies in the east. A few minor operations continued along the Rhine River during the year, but these were indecisive. The only encounter on the Italian front occurred near the end of the year at the Battle of Loano on November 23, 1795. It was a relatively minor affair, with 25,000 French troops facing a combined force of Austrians and Piedmontese numbering 18,000. The painting represents some of the positions that the French successfully assaulted, painted by Joseph Bellange in 1866. The French suffered 3,000 casualties, but the Austrians and Piedmontese suffered almost 50% casualties in dead, wounded, and captured. The terrain and the weather conspired to prevent pursuit, but the battle gave the French a foothold in the coastal region of the Alps, which Napoleon would exploit the following year. Probably the most famous episode of 1795 was the Royalist revolt in Paris that culminated on 5 October 1795. The famous 13 Vendémiaire, where Napoleon gave the Royalist mob a whiff of grapeshot, killing almost 400 and ending the Royalist attack. This ended the last serious opposition to the National Convention, which became the Directory immediately following this event. This is the reason that 13 Vendémiaire is considered the end of the French Revolution. The Revolutionary Wars of France, 1796. 1796 would be the last year of major combat for the first portion of the French and Napoleonic Wars, the War of the First Coalition. The coalition had grown from the single enemy of France in Austria to include almost all of Europe. In the process of the war, France had defeated or outlasted a good portion of these enemies. 1796 would be fought almost exclusively against the Austrians. The campaign across Germany was to be the main theater of war, and the Italian theater was to be of secondary importance. France had approximately 140,000 soldiers on the German frontier in two armies under General Jourdan in the north and General Moreau in the south. Napoleon had a strength of about 35,000 in Italy. Jourdan and Moreau faced an Austrian force of almost 200,000 soldiers, while a combination of Austrian and Piedmontese forces confronted Napoleon with about 50,000 men, but these were spread across northern Italy. Napoleon began his attack in April, and he immediately defeated Piedmontese forces and drove the Kingdom of Sardinia out of the war and forced the Austrians to retreat to the east. This caused the Austrians to shift forces from the German front to the Italian front. This shift enabled Jourdan and Moreau to cross the Rhine and move east. Unfortunately, the two French armies did not work in concert, and the Austrians, under the Archduke Charles, defeated Jourdan at Würzburg and pushed him back to the frontier, and then turned south and began to push Moreau back west along the Danube River, and finally dealt Moreau a sharp defeat at Emmendingen. This made the Italian theater much more important, and Napoleon did not disappoint. His campaign has been recorded many times over, but it can be divided into 3 episodes and summarized. The first is where Napoleon erupted out of the Maritime Alps region, won in 1795, to defeat the Piedmontese and drive the Austrians back. The next phase is Napoleon's investment of the fortified city of Mantua and his defeat of 4 separate Austrian efforts to relieve the city. And finally, Napoleon's defeat of the Austrians at Rivoli and his drive to within 80 miles of the Austrian capital of Vienna, which drove the Austrians to request a peace treaty that would result in the Treaty of Campo Formio in late 1797, which ended the War of the First Coalition. Despite the brilliance of this campaign, it must be remembered that Napoleon did not face the full strength of the Austrian armies, and his success would not have been as dramatic without the larger French operations in Germany. Napoleon dominates the tale after this, but it is equally important to remember and understand how the French Revolution survived before Napoleon took center stage. It is also important to remember that the armies that Napoleon led to victory across Europe was forged in the hardscrabble years of the Revolutionary Wars, and the leaders who stood with Napoleon also had their martial abilities honed during this time. Many may never have been heard of without the French Revolution enabling them an opportunity to display their merit. The period 1792 to 1796 saw the end of the French monarchy and saw the end of the French Revolution which had replaced it. It saw the end of advancement by position and saw the rise of advancing on your own merit. It saw the rise of Napoleon, who would dominate the scene for almost 20 years and cause this time frame to be one of the most studied and written about periods of conflict in history. The French Revolutionary War brought about cultural and social changes that have continued to this day, and much more was to come. As Winston Churchill would state about another conflict over 100 years in the future, 1796 was the end of the beginning.